welcome to the Global Bird Fair podcast, and tell us some of your story, and let's see where it leads us.
Thanks, Steve. Great to be on the show. I'm Jonny Hanson. I'm an environmental social scientist, so I focus on studying our relationship with the natural world rather than natural world itself, a relationship that we hold as individuals, but we also hold as groups. And at the Global Bird Fair, I'm going to be talking about two of my current projects, one of which is a book called Living with Lynx, about whether we could and should reintroduce apex predators like Eurasian lynx and grey wolves to Britain and to Ireland. And then I'll also be screening my short film about coexistence with snow leopards in Nepal, which is a place I've also done quite a bit of work, and asking what we in these islands can learn from Nepal about living with apex predators. So these are both stories that bring the world to life and bring our relationship with apex predators to life, a relationship that is complex and nuanced, and the book and the film both try to get to the heart of that.
Yes, I mean, jumping to a conclusion, do you simply weigh up the arguments, or do you have a fond preference for actually reintroducing predators?
I tried to come at it with an open mind. I tried not to, as so many of us do in this age, to stay in silos where we speak to people who think exactly like we do and therefore confirm our biases one way or another. I tried to go and talk to all sorts of people all over Western Europe and North America, but also rewilding and agricultural leaders across Britain and Ireland on this particular issue. And that is in part because in these islands, apart from the illegal release of 4 Eurasian lynx into the Scottish Highlands at the start of this year, it has been largely theoretical and hypothetical. So the purpose in going on the journey for the book was to actually go and explore what sharing landscapes with apex predators looks like, the challenges, the opportunities, the nice bits that we all want to talk about and make us feel good, but also the more challenging bits when they cause problems like eating livestock, or when you have to think about, unfortunately, things like culling or hazing or the use of force to manage them when they pose a threat to livestock or pose a threat to people. And I went to it with an open mind, and I still have an open mind. I think that it is a great idea in principle. I think in practice, it is challenging, and is challenging in practice less to do with the nature bit and much more to do with the human nature bit, in that the clash and the conflict here is not so much our relationship with these animals and our perspectives on these animals. It is about a clash between our different versions of these animals. The conflict is between each other, and the animals are kind of stuck in the middle. And what I mean by that is, to some of us, these animals represent a romantic view of nature. They represent a future vision for the land, a restoration of the wild. These species symbolize that, but particularly to some rural and many livestock farming communities, they can represent a threat to a way of life, to a daily routine. They can even, in some cases, represent distant urban bureaucrats meddling in rural affairs. And the intensity of the conflict is really those different symbolic versions of these animals clashing in our minds and in our society. And that was the real lesson that I took away. And I think that will be the real challenge in the UK and Ireland for us to consider in the future.
Yeah, there just really isn't a lot of space in these little islands here, is there? That's clearly one of the challenges. I mean, I've done a lot of, I lived a long time in East Africa, and done a lot of work there, and been involved in conservation, and most of the farming community living in that part of the world will be happy to see the end of lions and leopards and elephants as well. So yeah, living with predators does have its challenges. I've seen that. But tell me about Nepal. I mean, clearly you did find snow leopards.
Yes, although I should say that I have yet to see a snow leopard in the wild myself. I've been waiting a long time. I've worked with snow leopards in captivity, but I've yet to see one in the wild. That is partly because I am a social scientist, so I am talking to people about their relationship with snow leopards in partnership with my Nepali colleagues, and the work of the Snow Leopard Conservancy that my work in this story are really highlighting. They are the guardians of snow leopard landscapes, and my role through the story and as a researcher is really to support that. But we often think of landscapes like in East Africa that you've just said, or the Himalaya, we have a tendency sometimes to romanticize them and think of them as quote unquote pristine, as in somewhere where people are not. But on the other hand, you often find people and nature coexisting over long periods of time, and you have apex predators living side by side with pastoral communities who herd sheep and goats, and in the case of Nepal, yaks. And that is often where the challenge comes whenever these animals that we sometimes can romanticize because we see them sitting in a cozy armchair on a screen, when they then turn their considerable talents in being predators to killing livestock. And if you're a poor farmer or a farmer of any sort, losing your livelihood, that can pose a challenge. So Nepal was a great place to learn about that and to learn about some of the solutions, some of the challenges, and the film brings that to life.
And what did you discover about people's attitudes towards, in that case, snow leopards? Are they comfortable, or are they feel threatened? They really wish they weren't there?
No, not so much. There's a couple of really interesting lessons from Nepal for us to consider here in Britain and in Ireland. One is that solitary cat species are often easier to live alongside than gregarious packs of wolves, because even if the losses are similar, which in the study sites that I've worked in Nepal, the losses often were similar, but cats are finical. You hardly ever see them. They come in and out. Wolves, on the other hand, are very active and present in the landscape. You do see them, you do hear them. And for some reason, in Nepal, people also are much more tolerant of snow leopards compared to wolves. So that is something for us to weigh up here in terms of, do we reintroduce lynx, do we introduce wolves, or both? The other thing I was interested in looking at that is pertinent is that when we lose these animals from landscapes, we lose the memory of living alongside them. We lose the memory and the practice of farming alongside them. That has never happened in Nepal. So one of my big lessons is we should first and foremost redouble our efforts to maintain carnivores in landscapes where they always have been, to make sure that they never go. As it pertains to us, potentially bringing them back to these islands because of what is called the extinction of experience, where we've lost that memory of living and farming alongside them, is much harder than if they had never been away. If lynx had never vanished from these islands, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I've written this book. It's the act of returning them. And because of the English Channel and the Irish Sea, the fact that we as humans will bring them back makes it more complicated still. And that leads to my third lesson from Nepal. This draws on my PhD research that I did now about 10 years ago in some of the papers I published, that when I looked at how people felt about snow leopards, the single biggest factor was not whether they had lost livestock to snow leopards, although that was significant. It was about how they felt about snow leopard conservation, both the individual organization and the policies and practices used to conserve snow leopards. And that's a reminder that when we talk about conservation, it doesn't just happen as if by magic, nor do reintroductions happen as if by magic. We are involved in it. And again, that can mean that the conflict and the controversy is about that. Different visions for the land, different values, different perspectives on what conservation should be, what the countryside is for. Is it for producing food first and foremost? Is it for nature, climate, recreation? Is it all of those things? And so those lessons from Nepal, again, they're alive and well in Britain and Ireland in 2025.
Yeah. Let's turn to lynx. I'm aware that the Iberian lynx is doing quite well, and there are lots of people who organize tours for people to go and take photographs of them. Do you have experience of the Iberian lynx? Is that one of the things you studied?
No, I've not seen Iberian lynx in the wild. I've not seen Eurasian lynx in the wild, which just shows the power of these animals. Even if we never see them in the wild, they have this powerful hold in our imagination. But the recovery of the Iberian lynx is astonishing. It has been quite expensive because the numbers were so low that it was supplemented by a lot of captive breeding. And that makes it more expensive than, say, if we were doing it in Britain or in Ireland. And more generally, over the last 25 years, 30 years, the recovery of large carnivores across Europe, lynx, Iberian lynx, Eurasian lynx, grey wolves, brown bears, wolverines to a lesser extent, has been just remarkable. We
Mhm.
think of those species as belonging in the wilds of North America, but they roam the wilds of Europe. And they also roam parts of Europe that we would not consider wild. And that poses a problem when they turn up in landscapes that we consider agrarian or farmed, particularly when they're livestock. And conceptually, I think it poses a challenge because we associate these animals so much with wild and so-called pristine places, then that when they turn up in, for example, in the Netherlands, a family who had lost sheep to wolves, it's about as rural and agrarian a landscape as you could possibly get anywhere in Britain or Ireland either. It's the linear infrastructure of the Dutch landscapes, canals,
Mhm.
roads with oak trees lining them, and suddenly you have wolves turning up there. And for many of us, that is, in Europe, that has been a challenge to accept as an idea, on top of then for some communities, the challenges of changing how we farm. It's not that we can't farm with large carnivores around. It's that when they return, we have to change how we farm. And we as a species, as a general rule, we don't like change. That has posed and continues to pose, and certainly in these islands will pose significant challenges going forward.
But having said that, I've come across quite a number of people who own land in this country, the UK, farmers particularly, who have adopted rewilding, for want of a better word, particularly on marginal land where they struggle to make a traditional farming living out of it.
Mm.
You must be coming across that people in that kind of movement and turning farming into something more wild.
Yeah, very much so. And there are considerable opportunities with rewilding for land management, but
Right.
also when it comes to apex predators, sometimes it is not the apex predators that pose the biggest challenge to livestock farming. It is what we call mesopredators, so the red foxes
Yeah.
and the jackals of Africa or the coyotes of North America. Apex predators can sometimes suppress the populations of those, maintain them at a healthier level. When those apex predators disappear from the landscape, you can get what's called mesopredator release, when the populations of the foxes and the jackals and the coyotes surge to fill that role in the ecosystem. So there's some suggestions that if we had Eurasian lynx back, that would help to suppress the red fox population, and that there might actually be a net gain. There might be less losses of lambs to foxes
Yeah.
overall, also benefits for ground nesting birds. And the other benefit that is highlighted then with lynx from a social, socioeconomic perspective is the potential for tourism, which I think is a compelling argument, with the caveat that you're very unlikely to see a lynx stay tried and failed. Other tourists will try and fail, but certainly it can be part of what I would call the brand of a place. And I've done quite a bit of work on Nepal on tourism with snow leopards, another very enigmatic and elusive species. And that tourism, you can have tours to go and see the animal, but it's knowing that it's there. It's maybe going and checking a camera trap with a snow leopard scout, one of which Tashi people are going to be able to see in the film. So the tourism case is strong, and certainly there are benefits, but we would need to make sure that the benefits from that tourism, to which the people involved in tourism, a lynx or a snow leopard is an asset, to a farmer losing livestock, the lynx or the snow leopard is a liability. And the challenge then is to have innovative mechanisms that balance those scales. Can some of that financial benefit from tourism go to the farmer losing livestock, and therefore turn the species in question from a liability into an asset?
Tell us about the book that you'll be speaking about, but also a bit of your backstory as an author.
Well, this is my first book. I have some academic publications mostly on snow leopard conservation. I also used to run a community farm that balanced conservation and rural development and agriculture. But this is my first foray into popular science writing. And what I've tried to do is combine it with an adventure travelogue, a journey. In essential story terms, it's a quest. It's me going on a quest to see, what does coexistence look like? Well, firstly, what did it look like in the past in these islands when we had these species? what does it look like in the present in other parts of the world that have had these species return or have never lost them? And then what does it look like potentially in the future as I weigh up the pros and cons for my readers in terms of ecology, philosophy, politics, and economics. But I would say also the joy of getting to write a book like this, having otherwise doing most of my writing as an academic where it's facts alone, you strip out the emotion. And yet as human beings, we don't just live by facts. We also live by feelings, not just by evidence, but by emotion. And if we do not factor in the power of emotion when it comes to thinking about these animals, what they represent and symbolize and their potential return, then we're doing a disservice to our human nature in that our connection with the natural world, people who come to the bird fair, people who are listening to this, people who read the book and watch the film, it's not just that we know about these things, it's about that we feel them too. And so it was a pleasure to write a book that allowed me to pour my feelings into it and to help people navigate what they think and know, yes, but also what they feel about it. And that combination of thinking and feeling, I think, can be a very powerful one.
Indeed, it can. I mean, it's a paradox, isn't it, that we're a nation of animal lovers in a country that is one of the world's most nature depleted. I mean, is your work really the beginnings of a trajectory of sort of reversing that depletion, do you think?
I did come to the conclusion at the end of that, although I think will be challenging and complex and contested and financially quite expensive to reintroduce large carnivores, I think there is some momentum building that the recent unfortunate illegal releases will delay but not stop. I think this is a matter of not if, but when in Britain and probably in Ireland. When that will be exactly, I would be reluctant to put numbers on it, but it is part of this trajectory, like you say, towards seeing nature bouncing back instead of just, as for so many decades, it felt like conservation was just about sticking fingers in the dam. The beauty of rewilding and the thing that I am attracted to by is that sense of reversing the trends, of actually increasing space for nature instead of just managing decline. Whether or not large carnivores can solve all of our rewilding problems, as is sometimes hinted at in some of the messaging around their return and other books and authors who have written, I would caution to not to give them an unrealistic ecological savior complex. They can be really beneficial for our ecosystem, and almost certainly returning them to these islands would be really beneficial, especially through changing the number and behavior of deer. But I would be very wary of ascribing to them savior complex that they alone will solve the nature. They can be part of the solution, but they're not the only part of the solution.
Well, I'm very sure, speaking of conservation events, you'll have a lot of people who are intrigued by the entire prospect. So just to remind everybody, the name of the film and when people can see it.
The film is called Snow Leopard Trail and will be screened on Friday evening. And just before that, I will be talking about the book, The Turnstone Stage.
Right, that's Living with Lynx.
Living with Lynx, shared landscapes with big cats, wolves, and bears.
Fantastic. So one last question, Jonny. What's next on your project plan?
Well, I have lots of academic publications at various stages of publication, from everything on conservation enterprise to I've just collected data from 1,000 16-year-olds and 4,500 10 and 11-year-olds on their attitudes to large carnivore reintroductions. Because as far as I can tell, no one has asked future generations what they think on this issue. And yet they will be the ones either deciding on it or living with it, both the challenges and the opportunities. So for me, as a social scientist, it's really good to think intergenerationally and think about what the future leaders, environmental and farming and civic leaders, think about this. And that data will be published later this year, which is very exciting. But I also have I hope to write my next book about returning to Malawi, which is where I partly grew up and was very formative. I hope to be back there next year. My plans are to write about my return there after 20 years, showing my children Malawi, but also about the astonishing nature recovery that has taken place in Malawi. We should look to places like Malawi and Nepal here in Britain and for many lessons. For a long time, conservation was often about us teaching places like that lessons, but actually we have much to learn from those places about nature restoration in the UK.
I wish you all the best with that venture and look forward to the fruits of it. So thanks very much. And if we don't see you before, we'll probably cross paths at the Global Bird Fair in July.
That sounds good, Steve. Thank you so much.
Thank you.